Hello out there in the YouTube world. My name is Doug. I'm known as also the Scrappy Pappy. We're going to be teaching you some of my techniques and methods of scrapping metal. I've been doing it almost 20 years and I've acquired a few little tricks of the trade. You have to consider your location. I have a fairly good sized yard to do this in, so I have a lot of ample room to break down some big components like hot water heaters and washers and dryers. So in this video and the upcoming ones, I'm going to teach you my techniques and how to scrap for the money and versus the time. So if you don't have the time, you may want to just do the real basic, get the good metals off. I see too often other people taking to the scrap yard a complete hot water heater like one back here behind me that has copper and brass on it, and they just throw the whole thing in for steel. Steel is the lowest amount paid out. It's right now I think it's going for about 5 or 6 cents a pound. So you take the copper and brass off, you're going to get for brass, you know, somewhere in the 80 cents and even higher sometimes for the brass. For the copper, if it's number 2, you're going to get around $1.85 at this market price now. And for number 1 copper, you're going to get up to around $2.10. So that's some good money that they're just throwing away by tossing it all in the landfill. There are 2 reasons why I scrap. One is the money is nice. 2, it helps our environment. I see too often of metals being tossed into dumpsters or in trash cans and just taken to the landfill. And sometimes I can't get it out because it's been buried by all these pieces of construction lumber and even yard waste and stuff, and it's hard to get it out. So is that worth my time to dig and dig and dig? Not for me. But what we're going to teach you is most efficient way, and I am a little more advanced, so I use bigger and more powerful tools sometimes, but I started off with just a screwdriver, pliers, wire cutters, a couple of C-wrenches, crescent wrenches as known, or adjustable wrenches, and pipe wrenches. So that's where I started, and now I've gone further. And also another thing we're going to teach you in this is, besides the tools of the trade, I'm going to teach you also, you should always think safety. I have cut myself up so many times by just being careless and quick. So I want you to go out and get a good pair of gloves, so maybe some good boots and stuff, because some of the hot water heater stuff gets a little dirty, and I'll show you in this first video how muddy it can get. So have a nice area in your yard if you have an area that you can hide away. My wife is so patient with me, it's great. So and then goggles when you need it, maybe even a face mask occasionally when you're cutting through some stuff and it's creating some dust and particles. You don't want to get that in your lungs. So anyhow, this first video I'm going to do is on how to break down a gas hot water heater. All right, here we have the gas hot water heater. First, we're going to look at the thermostat valve, and right there it's gas controlled thermostat. And then we come down to the drain valve. That's brass, all brass. Now we have the PT valve, which is pressure and temperature valve, relief valve. That's brass. Then we have the hot and cold fittings that we're going to take off. Now, what I'm using here is Klein cable cutters. I acquired these from a lady that was getting rid of a bunch of stuff in the garage. You don't have to start with such big items like this. You can start with a pair of diagonal cutters, even a hacksaw. Now, what I'm cutting here is the aluminum tubing that feeds the pilot light, and then the gas little thermal sensor tube, and it sends a little pressure up to the gas control valve. The cutters that I'm using are bigger, and they go through the tube that right there that you're seeing me wiggle much easier than a pair of diagonal cutters. That's why you might want to use a hacksaw for that. And then diagonal cutters for these 2 here, the copper and the aluminum. I separate the aluminum as it goes over to clean aluminum, and then that goes into number 1 copper. Now I'm breaking off the wires. I save all these little wires too. I just put them in a big bin and they will cash in as copper wire. Now this is my 24-inch pipe wrench, and I'm using it to twist off the gas valve. and you just give it a couple turns and then spin it off. Sometimes you can spin it with your hands, start it off, but a lot of these plumbers put them on tight, and then with heat and cold contraction, they tighten up even more. That part right there I'm showing you has a lot of brass, and it has some copper in there as well. Now I go to my 18-inch pipe wrench, and with this pipe wrench, I take off my drain valve, and I'm also going to take off my copper fittings and my PT valve in a few minutes. As you can see, sometimes they're a little hard to take off. You got to give a nice little hit with the hand to get it spinning off. And then some of these valves do have metal in them. You have to look at it. If it's a ball valve, it's called dirty brass, and that's clean brass because that uses a gate valve. This here is the PT valve. I'm going to take the 18-inch crescent wrench or pipe wrench again and set it for the proper size. Pound it. Okay, this time that one didn't go so well. It's pretty on there tight. So now I take this 1.5 by 36-inch steel pipe. You can find that many times when you're scrapping, just a piece of steel pipe, and it gives you extra leverage to spin that off, get it going at least. Like I said, they corrode on there, or they hot and cold, it'll tighten up, or the plumber just put a big oomph on it. All right, spin that off, and that is actually dirty brass right now, but I will show you later how to break that down into a couple of different components. There's actually some copper recovery on that. Now you can see some water coming out of there. It gets a little messy, like I mentioned in my opening statement. So now I'm going to go and I'm using the 18-inch pipe wrench again, and I'm going to take off the supply and return feeds on the hot water heater. So it's hot and cold. So get it set just right for that coupling, and then we'll just pull it right off. Sometimes you have to use the pipe to get more leverage on them. Some of that gets really tight. I've actually had a couple times they're on so tight I just took my Sawzall later and cut it off just to get it. And again, it's time versus money. Do you have the time to work on that little piece of copper? Which again, it's pretty good money. It's for number 2, it's about $1.80 and up per pound. So it all adds up eventually. So that's number 2 because it's got solder on it. Anywhere you see solder or really heavy corrosion, that is usually rated at number 2 copper. And number 1 is no corrosion at all. Now here I have to use the leverage again. This one was on a little tighter. So get the wrench set at a good angle and then get the pipe into the end there. And it's just bada beam and bada boom. And then you spin it right off. Now coming up here, you'll see once I take this fitting off, I'll spin the tank around and you'll see much of that water coming out of it. And again, metal yards will not take it if it's got a lot of water because that's no money for them either. So dump your hot water heaters as best you can and get the best amount of money for your metal. And there's the water. Now here we have a hot water heater with a more electronic style gas valve. And it's a lot of plastic, but there's electric components and some metals in it. My scrapyard fortunately does take it as the other type as well. Now what I'm cutting here with the diagonal cutters is the wires, the gas pilot tube, and the thermocoupler copper tube. Then I get my Klein cutters again and I cut the metal part off because the wire cutters are just a little too small for this pipe. Bend those aside. Now with this gas valve, it's too big for a pipe wrench to get around without breaking it up into a bunch of pieces. So I take a crowbar and go into the gas inlet port and give it a little persuasion. Sometimes it's not enough persuasion, as you can see here. So I spin it off and with the crowbar, and then I finally get it off by hand. Well, the tools for the trade for the gas hot water heater are a 24-inch pipe wrench, which takes care of the gas valve, and then I have the 18-inch pipe wrench, which takes care of all the other fittings, the brass and the copper. And then I have the pipe that helps for leverage if you need it. And then we have down here is the Klein cutters for cutting the steel bigger stuff. And then I have the diagonal cutters that cuts off the copper and aluminum tubing.